with this webinar. I want to welcome all of you who have joined us, especially those who have joined us from other colleges. Our association is called the OPTAA, which is the Occupational and Physiotherapy Alumni Association. We are an organization of OT and PT graduates of CMC, and we have members who have graduated over the last few decades, and our latest entries are people from 2016 batch. After the pandemic started, we had started doing webinars every month because we realized that there are a lot of alumni with a lot of clinical expertise, and we wanted to keep in touch with each other. So this is OPTAA's webinar 14. I'm very happy to say that we have been able to have webinars over the last almost 2 years now without really breaking. My name is Reema Samuel. I am the president of the OPTAA Executive Committee for this term. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Vimal Sriram, who will be our moderator for today. So Dr. Vimal is an occupational therapist. He has over 20 years of experience within acute, community, rehabilitation, and academic settings. He is currently a fellow of the Higher Education Academy. He is involved in teaching for MSc in Health Policy at the Imperial College, London. He is a board member of the Research and Development Board of the Royal College of Occupational Therapists. He is a NICE fellow and trustee of the Dementia Adventure charity. So he started his undergraduate training in 1996 in BOT from CMC. He went on to do various postgraduate courses from colleges in UK, and most recently he has been awarded a doctorate in population health from the prestigious University of Oxford. He has received various research grants from the National Health Service. He has published many original articles and national reports, especially in the field of assistive technology and carers' experience for people with dementia. Apart from all his impressive achievements, he is also kept in regular touch with CMC and OPTAA. He always visits his department every time he comes down, and he is an active member of OPTAA, and he is also part of the OPTAA Advisory Core team. It is with much pride that I introduce today's moderator, Dr. Vimal Sriram. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Reema. It was very kind words in your introduction to me. I hope I can do the same justice to Stuti, who's actually in staff for the day. As part of what I wanted to do today, I was hoping to touch on a couple of points about research generally before I introduce Stuti to the rest of the group who are listening in today. As part of my work and my experience with research and some of my horizon scanning and some of the work that I do, some things are very clear in how research should be and how it should be perceived and what should happen. So as allied health professionals, we should be careful and be aware that our profession depends on good, solid evidence, and a lot of that evidence is generated through good, high-quality research. And as an allied health professional, as a physio or an OT, there's a requirement that you're very good in your clinical practice. And as you go up the career ladder, you're also expected to be a good leader, someone who can support and mentor and coach the next generation of researchers and clinicians. There's also an expectation that you teach and share that knowledge and learning with others as you go along. And most importantly and crucially is that you generate the evidence that justifies some of the practices that we make and some of the treatments that we provide to our patients. And that's crucial. So these 4 pillars of good clinical practice, education and learning, leadership and research forms a foundation for how we practice as practitioners and how we provide care for our patients and carers who depend or are looking after those patients. Now, research, again, is a whole spectrum. You have, as most allied health professionals, we do lots of applied health research. So we actually work with people. So lots of our work and our research is aimed at the people end, or what we call as bedside research. So we actually go off and do research with people who are receiving our care or who are likely to receive our care. But you also have the other end of the spectrum, which is bench side research. You're doing research in a laboratory, or you're doing research on physiological elements of care, which is equally important. And a lot of that traditionally has sat with medical professionals or clinical scientists or biomedical scientists who provide the bench side research. And it's very rare to see someone who's able to combine the two of bedside as well as bench side research. And I think Stuti is a beautiful example of someone who has combined and taken that on board and does both bench side research and has been involved in bedside research as well. By way of introduction, I think, as you can see from the screen, Stuti is an occupational therapist. She's from the batch of 2015 in Christian Medical College. She's also been someone who's consistently excelled in academic practice, be it at the CMC or outside as well. She's someone who's won a gold medal as part of her undergraduate education. She's also gone off and done research internships in Japan and in other places in India, alongside her clinical practice, alongside her internship that she needs to complete for CMC. She's also one among a very few OTs within India who's got a good and very strong academic profile through publication. She's got 7 publications in print already, and 3 of them are first author publications, including systematic reviews and original articles. She's also got another 2 publications under review, and I'm sure once the reviewers have looked at the good work that Stuti has been doing, they'll be published in short order. In addition, Stuti has some good news. She's just heard fairly recently, she's been accepted to go off and read for her PhD at what is a very prestigious university in the world, the University of Southern California in the USA. We're all very proud, and I've known Stuti and I've been interacting with Stuti for the past couple of years, and I've seen the dedication she has, the passion she has for research and for wanting to make a difference in people. And as part of that, she also wants to give back to the community. She also wants to mentor and coach people, and that's something that I've always welcomed, because I've had the privilege and pleasure of being mentored and supported by my seniors. And I've also had the pleasure of working with my juniors and my colleagues in some of the research that I'm doing currently. And I'm sure Stuti will continue those collaborative links with India, even if she goes off to the USA. So I'm going to stop there and give time to Stuti. It's really good that you're here, Stuti, and it'll be really wonderful to hear from you.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Stuti, go on.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rima sir, for that really wonderful introduction. And thank you, Rima ma'am, for giving me, and OPTAA also for giving me the space for sharing my experience. So I think my presentation is going to be a mixed bag of a couple of things. One is my journey thus far as an entry-level professional, how I got started off with research, and also what I've learned so far. So I have tried to keep this presentation not very scientific or educational, but it's going to be more experience-based, because while I was going through my journey, I realized that there is a very big gap in terms of especially for allied health students or allied health professionals, as Vimal sir mentioned. There's a gap in terms of what we learn in our college during our undergraduate degree, and what we practice in clinical practice and research. So, and also how we give back to our larger community in a broader sense. So I have been pretty busy doing a lot of different things. And so when I was discussing with Rima about how I should go about and what all topics I should cover, I just thought of giving everyone a gist of everything. So that students who are just going to graduate or recently have graduated can get some idea in terms of where to get started, because not just allied health graduates, but medical graduates from India and abroad, public health graduates, engineering graduates reach out to me on LinkedIn, and they ask me for help in terms of how to navigate, research generally as an Indian student. So I think that even if you're a medical student or you're an OT student or you're an engineering student, it is quite new and challenging. So I hope that my experiences can be a little helpful to people who think that it's a very daunting process. And secondly, because I know that there are a lot of faculty members here who are alumni of OPTAA and who've been in CMC before, and so maybe they can kind of take back from my experiences and share it with their students. And based on my experiences also, it will hopefully help them to pick up few certain things in terms of how they can help foster or mentor their own students. As Vimal sir mentioned, that mentorship is extremely important to do anything in life. So with that, I'll get started with my presentation. So a little bit about me. So I am a recent graduate in occupational therapy. I finished my internship in 2020, and then I started with my bond. And right now I am in the acute inpatient neurological rehabilitation setting at CMC Vellore. So my major research interests are understanding mechanisms of brain activity and recovery following disease processes. And also how public health and neurological, what are the public health and neurological impacts of infectious diseases. I have been doing some work on COVID-19 in the past 2 years as well, since the pandemic started. So I will also be touching slightly on why this is so important for OTs, because as I was going through the process, I felt that the field of neuroscience or research specifically was very, very dominated by basic scientists, people who've done life sciences, engineers, biomedical engineers, data scientists, cellular and molecular scientists, and the number of physiotherapists or occupational therapists is relatively very less, especially occupational therapists is very less. So hopefully I can give some perspective and shed some light into why it's so important for OTs to specifically venture into neuroscience, research and practice, and how that has kind of sparked an interest for me and what I'm going to be doing in my PhD. Apart from that, I have also been involved with a lot of advocacy so I have worked in various capacities with the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, your Commonwealth, the Healthcare Information for All, Global Health Workforce Network. These are just names of various organizations that I have been involved with, and I will be touching on that slightly later. And finally, something that I'm really proud of is my outreach activity, and something that I've got a lot of support from all over India and also globally. Is a nonprofit initiative which I co-founded with my two co-founders, one of whom is currently a freshman at Harvard, and the other one is a project research fellow at IIT Gandhinagar. And three of us together started Stimulus in 2020 when the pandemic had just started. And so we thought that there was a real big need for students, especially high school students and early undergraduates, to be exposed to brain sciences and neuroscience. And so we thought of doing something which was more targeted and more catered towards a younger audience, as opposed to something like Society for Neuroscience or the British Neuroscience Association or the Indian OT Association or the American OT Association, which is targeted specifically towards professionals. So this is an initiative that we started, and I will be talking a little bit more about that later in the presentation. All right. So a little bit about how I got started with my journey. I started off as a volunteer for United Nations online program. And I was honestly in my third year of my undergraduate degree. In the first 2 years, I was quite involved with OPTAA, and I had different posts and I was engaged with different activities. But during the third year, I was getting a little bored, just sitting in my hostel room. And so I did not really know how to go about it. I knew that I wanted to do something for the community. I wanted to give back to the community in terms of the knowledge that I was gaining as a healthcare professional. And so I just came across United Nations online volunteering program, and I realized that there were opportunities to write content. And I have been a person who's always been a very dedicated reader. So I used to read a lot of books growing up, and I used to also write. So I thought this was a good opportunity for me to sort of share my thoughts, voice my opinions and my views, combining my interest in writing with the knowledge that I was gaining as a healthcare professional in the making. And so that was kind of like the inception of my journey as a volunteer, and then into advocacy, and then eventually starting my own initiative. So I started expressing my views and opinions on different issues pertaining to the healthcare field in general, not specific to OT or PT, but like how the larger community was affected by different things. So I did a lot of writing and volunteering for different organizations. So these are just some screenshots of some of the articles that I wrote in the process over the last couple of years. And as an United Nations online volunteer, I had the exposure to work with different organizations from Africa, from East Africa and South America and other different parts of the world, where I was exposed to various issues like water scarcity, gender inequality, access of education for women, access to education for women. So these kind of experiences really opened my eyes to all the challenges that existed in the world. And so, and that made me really think about how I, as an OT or as a healthcare professional, could contribute to this. And one of the major things that really struck with me was inequality and inaccessibility to education, especially for young people with disabilities. And because I had so much exposure working with people with disabilities while I was training as a student and then as an intern and then finally as a bond candidate at CMC, I thought it might be really interesting to kind of also share my opinions and advocate for people who have a disability. So after I started working with the United Nations online program, I was also part of the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, through which I hosted I conducted a focus group discussion, and through that I got responses in terms of how young people, especially students, can be more involved in advancing primary healthcare. And I pitched that to the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth, and it was selected. And so I was invited to attend the Global Conference on Primary Healthcare, which was held in Astana in 2018. And there I did work on the adoption of the Declaration of Astana, which was renewed from the Declaration of Alma-Ata 40 years later in 2018, which is basically kind of like a set of rules and regulations to advance primary healthcare for the next decade, for the next century. So these are things which I have mentioned over here in the form of points. I also work with Healthcare Information for All, which is basically aimed at creating awareness about different healthcare related issues. It's a forum to address lack of healthcare information. It is a UK-based organization, so I am a country representative coordinator for India, and we have a lot of public health professionals active on this forum. I also worked with Women in Global Health briefly as a volunteer, where I was involved in creating reports and doing research on understanding how ASHA workers, that is accredited social health workers or activists and community health workers, especially during the pandemic, can be better supported, and the inequitable distribution of wages across states in India for ASHA workers. While I was working with the United Nations Major Group, I encountered science policy, and so I had an opportunity to write an op-ed article, which is over here, and I can link it later, on assistive technologies to address the divide between the developed and developing world. So as we all know that assistive technologies are really important for people with disabilities. However, accessibility and equity in terms of distribution of assistive technologies is quite skewed in the developing versus low end. So I recently came across an article that you shouldn't really use the developing and developed world words anymore. So I would address them as high income versus low and middle income countries. And I have addressed them as that in my article as well. So I had the opportunity to work with the Journal of Science Policy and Governance and the United Nations Major Group for Children and Youth to write this article and certain recommendations on how more centralized channels can be adopted for the equitable distribution of assistive technologies for people in low and middle income countries. And this was presented in 2020 at the United Nations Convention on Science and Technology for Development. And so it gave a great platform for my opinions and views to be expressed, and also for something that is an important issue for people with disabilities to be addressed, the larger scale of things. Apart from this, specific to neurology and neuropsychiatry, I volunteered with the COVID neuropsych group, which I'll be talking about. And I also volunteered quite briefly with the neurosurgery and neurology interest group. The reason why I've mentioned these names is because if people are interested in neurology or neuroscience, you can look these organizations up. They are based in the UK, and they're doing some great work to kind of help educate people about disease processes, about the brain. Right, so talking about my research interest now. So while performing the literature review for my undergraduate thesis, which was on developing a functional assessment scale for people with acquired brain injury, I came across a few papers which mentioned the use of non-invasive brain stimulation with therapeutic intervention, that is occupational therapy. So there's a very famous study called the Neuro15. If anybody's interested in understanding this further, you can have a look at this. So it is basically the combination treatment of low frequency repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation and intensive occupational therapy to treat ataxic hemiparesis. So this is where the role of OT comes in, and I would really like to emphasize that this is very important because in my experience, what I've come across is that there's a lot of highly focused neuroscience research that is going on, which is very, very specialized. So there are people who are doing research using very specific techniques in neuroscience, like especially cellular molecular neuroscience, people using machine learning algorithms, and people using artificial intelligence, people using infrared spectroscopy and different types of techniques to understand the gap in terms of translating that back to the patients. And ultimately, as a clinician, I have trained as a clinician, so I definitely am very interested in the aspect of how all of this specific research using ophthalmoscopes or really expensive equipments translate back to helping the patient at the core level of it. So this was a very interesting study wherein, so we all deal with stroke patients, especially here in CMC, like stroke patients are in abundance. And some of them have hemiparesis as opposed to hemiplegia. So in stroke patients, what they did was they gave something called as repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation, which is non-invasive. So if you've heard of intracranial invasive surgeries or electrocorticography or ECOG, wherein they remove the fascia and they remove the layer of the skull and they place electrodes from the brain to read brain activity or to stimulate the brain. That is an invasive procedure because they are actually entering into the pia and the dura mater of the brain. Whereas non-invasive brain stimulation, you just wear a swim cap, like how EEG works. It's similar to that. You just wear a swim cap and you mark the area of the brain, and then you apply a magnetic stimulation to it. And I'm going to explain the physiological principle behind how it works in a little bit. But this is something which is very interesting. And so they combine this technique, which is an adjunctive method, with regular occupational therapy treatment. So whatever protocols that we use for upper limb treatment of hemiparesis for people with a stroke, they combined both together. And the results, even though the patient size was less, the results were really good. We all use the Fugl-Meyer upper extremity evaluation. So they saw that there was a really good improvement in the Fugl-Meyer assessment scores. And they also saw that the patients had improvement in terms of their functional participation, in terms of doing their activities of daily living. So if you're interested, you can have a look at this paper. I'm not going to go into too much depth. Right. So when I came across this paper, I was really interested because this was something which was targeting physiology, anatomy, and occupational therapy at the same time. So it was not just giving the patient the activity and then having an outcome which is measured tabletop. So for example, if we do a cognitive evaluation on the patient, we get an immediate outcome. We don't really get to see what is happening inside their brain. We don't really get to record the patient's brain activity. So for example, we are training a patient to eat with the help of a spoon, and that is something that we are doing on a repetitive basis, and on a daily basis we are helping the patient to feed themselves. So that is something that we are targeting. But when I saw that people, researchers around the world were looking at how that affected brain mechanisms and brain activity, I was really interested in that prospect. So I looked more further and deeper into it, and I did a lot of detective work, and I found out what type of people were working in this field, and I saw that there were OTs specifically from Japan and the Far East Asian countries that were looking, especially South Korea, Japan, who were doing a lot of TMS work, and they were all trained as OTs, and then they did some physiology and things like that. So I was very interested, and I tried contacting a lot of professors. Of course, I had my own limitations being a student at that time. So I contacted various professors from around the world, and I was very blessed to hear back from Professor Liang, who was my host at the Cognitive Motor Neuroscience Lab at Kyoto University, where I was a visiting researcher student, observer student in 2019. And I took this gap period that I think CMC students have a gap period between their final year to internship, when you wait to kind of hear your results to know whether you've passed or failed your exams of final year. So I used that gap period of 1.5 months to go there and experience this, find out some research on this particular field of interest. So what I really looked at, the experiments that I did there, was to understand the brain mechanisms behind contralesional and or contralateral and ipsilateral brain activity while performance of finger movements and in the dominant and the non-dominant hand. So basically, I'm sure people here have heard of we use EMG biofeedback for our treatment especially, and then EEG is also something that is used to monitor brain activity. And then there's also something called as functional MRI. So we've all seen CT scans and MRI scans, which tell us about lesions inside the brain, or when a person has brain injury, where exactly is the lesion located. Functional MRI is something which picks up a BOLD response, which is a blood oxygen level dependent response, which basically occurs because there's an activation and there's an increase in the oxygenation level in the particular tissue of the brain when that particular part of the brain gets activated. So when I move my hand up and down, the hand area and the primary motor cortex in the brain will get activated. So if somebody is taking my fMRI now, they would see that there's an increased BOLD level or BOLD response over my primary motor cortex, or the M1. So what I did was so the experiments that we did were on healthy participants, because of course getting approvals to do research on patients can be quite difficult, especially when in abroad countries. So we looked at healthy participants, and we looked at two conditions. One was when the person performed the actual finger movement. So the first dorsal interosseous, which is the index finger flexion, extension, and when they imagined the movement. And then we recorded EMG biofeedback, EMG from the FDI muscle, and we observed whether there was a motor evoked potential through the TMS or not. I will talk about what MEP is in a minute. So this was very interesting to see, because I saw that when the patient was imagining the movement, even then there was a motor evoked potential which was observed in the dominant hand. As compared to the non-dominant hand, the MEP was a little larger. So what does it translate to in terms of therapeutic practice? So we can actually leverage this to train our patients to imagine movements, which is something called as motor imagery, which is quite common in the practice of TMS, adjunctive therapeutic intervention. So that MEP can be elicited. And if the MEP is elicited, that means that there is a link between the brain and the spinal cord and the peripheral muscle. That means that you can ask the patient to keep imagining the movement through motor imagery, and ultimately, once you get the motor evoked potential, that means that there is there is no cut in the corticospinal tract. The tract integrity is maintained, and that can be leveraged therapeutically, to help the patient to learn and relearn the movement. And that is one of the major principles behind MEP elicitation, to facilitate movement and training in patients with stroke or head injury or things like that. So this is important for OTs, because we focus a lot on the hand, and when we are training our patients, there's something that, different activities that we can do. We need to really think about how the brain mechanisms are affected through this. And I know this might not be everyone's area of interest, but it certainly helps to be involved in this, because we do so much of neurological rehabilitation. So this is just a an example of what we did over there. So this is a TMS machine. As you can see, it's a figure of 8-shaped coil. So it basically works on the physics principle that magnetic field can elicit an electric potential, and the electric potential is basically excites the pyramidal tracts and increases the excitatory potential of the neurons. So I hope everyone remembers a little bit of physiology of, synaptic plasticity and synaptic potential. Maybe it's like a long time ago that we studied, but this is basically what happens. And so this is just a very simple example of, so if you are applying, so this is basically the TMS coil, and there is a cortical, so this is your motor cortex. So you apply TMS over the primary motor cortex. I'm saying primary motor cortex because it is a very common region where for motor skill training where the TMS is applied. And what happens is, this is your cortex, this is your pyramidal neuron, and there's an interneuron over here. And so this is your cortical spinal tract, which is important for motor activity. And what happens is, here you have the alpha motor neuron, the spinal motor neuron, which is once the magnetic field is given from here, it translates into electrical potential. It changes the polarity of the cells over here, of the neurons over here, and then it activates this, and then it activates the spinal alpha motor neuron, generates an action potential, which goes to the peripheral nerve and ultimately affects the contralateral target muscle. So because there is a decussation over here, when you apply TMS to one side, it will affect the contralateral side. So what is this? Basically, this contralateral target muscle is activated, and it gives something called as an MEP, which is a peak-to-peak amplitude, which shows the corticospinal tract excitability or integrity. So if you have an MEP present, MEP is nothing but motor evoked potential, which basically is shown by the EMG. So if the TMS is given and it goes like a tuck, so you can hear a sound actually because of the magnetic fields that are induced. So when you place the TMS coil on the head, there's a tuck sound that goes, and so it goes really fast, and then you immediately get, so it's attached to a computer on the screen, like how EMG generally is, and then you can see a long amplitude like that. And so what that basically shows is the EMG of the muscle, the muscular activity. And if that is present, that means that there is some corticospinal tract integrity, even in hemiplegic patients, and you can harness that or leverage that to train patients to improve their motor skills in the hand. The same thing can be done for the leg as well, right? So that was the basic principle or the physiology behind some of the research that I did over there. And this was very interesting for me because the professor who hosted me was trained as an occupational therapist, and then he went on to become a neurophysiologist. So he did a lot of interesting research on rat models, on humans, healthy humans, and also on patients. And so I had the opportunity to facilitate one research experiment with a patient where we observed some H reflex activity from the lower limb. But that was not my primary experiment. The primary experiments that I did were with healthy individuals, and which I already talked about previously. Right. So from 2019 to 2020, that was a transition from my internship period, and then the pandemic started. So again, that was an opportunity for me to. I saw that kind of as an opportunity to sit and do work from the confines of the current place that I was in, because obviously the opportunity for collaboration and going somewhere else and doing things was limited. So during this time, I had the opportunity to collaborate with the COVID Neuropsych group. So basically the Neuropsych of COVID group consists of a group of interdisciplinary neurologists, neuropsychiatrists, primarily based in the UK, medical students from the UK. I think I was the only OT from India. And so we had a large group of people who basically did some major systematic reviews on understanding the neurological and the neuropsychiatric effects of COVID. And one of the systematic reviews that we did was published. It was one of the largest systematic reviews done till date, where we examined almost 2,000 plus articles to to find out what were the neuropsychiatric symptoms post-COVID and also in persistent COVID. Then I collaborated with Dr. Suresh Kumar, who also used to work as an OT here in CMC Vellore, and then went on to pursue research in the UK, and also currently works with Public Health Foundation of Public Health Foundation of India, IRPH, I'm not sure. I will check that. So we collaborated on a paper on the role of occupational therapy in COVID. So when we were looking at literature, and that was in the beginning of the pandemic. So when we were looking at literature, we felt that all other professions were getting a lot of, obviously everybody was talking about the role of doctors, nurses, and even physiotherapists to a certain extent, but there was very little mention of OTs. So we felt the need to express something that OTs also can do to contribute. And this paper is available on Welcome Open Research platform. So if anybody is interested, you can have a look at it. It's not an original article, but it's just an opinion article that we collaborated. And Sir was very kind and good. And basically, we suggested how OTs can play an important role in understanding and analyzing occupations, and how that can help with, so that time the COVID lockdown was going on. So what we suggested or recommended was that as OTs, we can help analyze and identify occupations and how they can be unlocked in terms of a lockdown from the pandemic in different phases. Then I did a collaborative hypothesis that was towards 2021 on the use of TMS neurofeedback using a BCI-based approach. So basically, towards the end of 2020-2021, I started developing further tests in neuroscience. And so I was looking at doing some research in my specific area of interest. And I emailed a lot of professors from around the world to ask them if there was any opportunity for me to do research with them, given that the COVID pandemic was going on, something that could be done remotely. And I heard back from Dr. Kathy Rudy from Trinity College Dublin School of Neuroscience, and I collaborated with her. So her research also is very, very similar to understanding how mechanisms of stroke or recovery work after brain recovery work after stroke. And she also uses a lot of brain-computer interface and TMS in her research. So what we did was we collaborated on a hypothesis paper where we proposed a hypothesis on the use of TMS along with neurofeedback using brain-computer interfaces. So if you don't know what a brain-computer interface is, it's basically nothing but something that, the computer and the brain become together. They can be synced together. So there is some activity that can be recorded from your brain, either through EEG electrodes, mostly through EEG electrodes. And that is displayed onto a computer through the monitor on the computer. And you can help control your brain activity, or your brain activity can be depicted on a computer screen through the electrodes, and that shows the activity that is happening inside your brain. And this can be used as an approach like brain and computer interface because it's together. It can be used as an approach to train people with stroke or any other kind of disorder to relearn regain motor skills by observing movement or performing movement and observing their brain activity. So what we proposed a theory for big-data dysphoria, which is a rare condition. It's a neurological, neuropsychiatric condition where there are structural, functional changes inside the brain, specifically in the primary somatosensory cortex, the superior parietal lobule, the insula, which is kind of debatable, but yeah, different parts of the brain where there are changes that happen because of which a person tends to disregard one of their limbs. So it can be either the hand or the leg, and they start developing immense hatred towards this particular body part. And as a result of that, they want to get rid of it. And surprisingly, there isn't any reliable form of treatment at present available for body integrated dysphoria. And there's a very small group of researchers working on this particular condition, mainly out of Switzerland. And I had the opportunity through Dr. Rudy, to collaborate with these group of researchers, and because they were also co-authors on our paper. And basically what happens is they want to disregard the limb. So one of the best ways to alleviate stress is to just amputate the limb, which results in a permanent and extreme form of treatment and results in a permanent disability. So when I saw that there was a condition as an OT, the OT in me realized and thought that, okay, a condition which can actually be prevented, leading to disability, especially something that has a psychological and a neurological and a functional component to it. How can I sort of, think of helping to find a treatment for it? So our hypothesis is not tested, but we collaborated, we thought, and we brainstormed, and we realized that the regions of the brain that were involved in this particular disease or condition are similar to what happens in stroke or other somatosensory deficits. And so something like TMS neurofeedback training through a computer game can help them to to reintegrate the limb into the schema of their brain representation. So we propose that using a computer game, something like using rewards to control their activity through the affected limb or the disregarded limb can motivate them to use the computer game in a more positive manner and slowly integrate that back into the schema of representation of the affected limb. So you can read the paper. It's available in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience. These are just like screenshots of the papers that I talked about right now. Right. So as Sir mentioned, I'm going to be pursuing my PhD soon at the Neuroplasticity and Neurorehabilitation Lab led by Dr. Stuti Lu. So the lab really does some interesting work in 3 major paradigms. So one is, again, brain-computer interfaces and virtual reality, non-invasive brain stimulation, and big data neuroimaging. So these are all 3 things that I'm really interested in, and it does it in a population of stroke. So Dr. Lu is also trained primarily as an occupational therapist, as a psychologist, and has a research lab. And so some of the things that she's currently doing, and I will also be doing in the future, are Reinvent. I felt the need to mention all these things just so that people can become aware of so many different things that OTs can do and are doing probably at like this in other moment. So Reinvent is rehabilitation environment using integration of neuromuscular based virtual enhancements for neural training. So it's something which is to do with virtual reality. So people who have difficulty moving their body in actual reality can translate that into virtual reality. And the healthy body in VR is controlled using their own brain and muscle activity. So basically in virtual reality, the signal is transported from the actual reality, and that is used to train people with different types of conditions. And the lab focuses mainly on the clinical population of stroke, and so that is why it's important. One disclaimer here I would like to mention is all of the research that I have been talking about, I know it is very difficult to implement it in a low resource setting. And so a lot of people might have this doubt that all of this is great and it's really good to do research on, but clinically it might not be very feasible to implement. So I'm fully aware of the fact. The idea is just to make people aware of all the possibilities that are out there. Then something that's called as Enigma stroke recovery. So if people are aware of something known as the Enigma Consortium, the Enigma Consortium is basically a consortium of scientists dedicated towards a lot of different types of conditions. So there's a consortium for depression, there's a consortium for OCD. So Enigma Stroke Consortium is headed by Dr. Du, who is going to be my future advisor, and it consists of different researchers from around the world who bring together big data or like a lot of data in neuroimaging through structural MRI scans of thousands of people after stroke. And so what it does is combining all this data from different people from different parts of the world can give a more input into how brain scans evolve, how people have different lesions after stroke, and what that tells us to understand the process of brain recovery. Again, a lot of this research is very mechanistic. So it does not always have to be necessarily translate into OT clinical practice or OT outcome, but at the end of the day, some way or the other, it does relate to what we do as occupational therapists. And another thing that the lab does is ATLAS, which is anatomical tracings of lesions after stroke, where people who trace lesions, mostly I think in CMC neurologists do this. I don't know if OTs and PTs do this, but this is something that again we can do, because especially when we are going to see patients in the ward side, we do tend to look at the brain scan of the patient just to identify where the lesion area is, sometimes because the diagnosis of the patient might not be available. So this data set gives manually traced MRI lesions which are already pre-done, and the lab is using machine learning and AI algorithms to retrain data sets to predict outcomes in other conditions. Sorry. Okay. So stimulus, a little bit about that, and I'll end with my presentation. It's a brainchild of curiosity and need. which grew out of the pandemic. And as I mentioned earlier, I felt that there was an immense need for people to understand about the brain sciences. And I felt that all the experience that I gained while working as an occupational therapist and the different type of exposure that I was given working with different patients here in CMC really gave me a lot of perspective into understanding disease processes, and that is what drew me towards understanding disease mechanisms. So I was already aware of how it impacts the participation and the outcome and the quality of life of people. I kind of wanted to work my way backwards to understand what is happening inside the brain that is leading to these outcomes. So when I was doing all of my research and all of these things, a lot of people reached out to me saying, how do you do this? And how do you come across this? Especially a lot of young students. So when I was back in high school, I wish somebody would have told me that something as interesting as this exists. A lot of us don't know about OT, didn't know about OT when we started off initially. And so I wanted to kind of give people that opportunity to know about different things, become aware about what we do as allied health professionals and how important we are to the interdisciplinary rehabilitation of people. And so from this need that I felt, I was lucky enough to connect with 2 other like-minded individuals, and we came together and we formed this initiative. And right now we have a global presence where we've impacted around 5,000 students around the globe, and we've been able to connect in events at a large scale. So some of the activities that we do, if anybody is interested, is Synapse Society, where we give an open forum and space for discussion of different topics related to the brain sciences. So it can be anything related to fundamental neuroscience. It can be anything related to disease processes. So recent one that we did was on depression. And all of these are conducted by either resource persons that we get from different parts of the world or by students themselves. Then we did the November Convention, which was again a large scale interdisciplinary neuroscience conference that was one of the first to be done by Indian youth. And we collaborated with another organization called Project Encephalon, which is run by students of the elite research institutions in India like ICERS and IISc. Then we did Research 101, where we did a workshop on getting started off with research as a high school student or as an undergrad. So, and then we also do some educational activities and awareness building activities in different schools. As of now, we've done it in 3 schools with a target audience focusing on young women and girls to encourage them to take up more interest in pursuing higher education in the STEM fields. And then finally, diversification in academic research is also one of the things that we focus on as part of Students. This is a website and you can have a look at it. I can share the link if anybody is interested. So my concluding slide, my advice to young graduates and to people who are mentoring young graduates is network. Networking is really important, and networking is something that really changed my life. As I was here in CMC, a lot of the things that I got, a lot of the opportunities that I got was only because a lot of people were very kind to me, but they were not kind to me just like that. I reached out to people, I established contact with them, I clearly communicated what I required, what I needed from them, and how they could help me. And people were really, frankly, honestly, very, very nice, and everybody was really helpful. And everybody spent their time, spent their energy, gave their efforts. It's all about asking. A lot of students have come to me and they've said this to me, that like, how do I go about it? I'm scared. Or what if they take it in a negative sense or a wrong sense? Or how do I email a professor? How do I reach out to somebody? I mean, the one thing that I can say to everyone is that the worst thing that can happen is they're going to say no, or they're going to not respond to you. So that's the worst that can happen. So just go out there, put yourself out there, especially in today's world. I think that you are only as good as your network. So I don't know if other alumni who have been working in professionally for a long time will agree with this, but times are really tough now. And I have realized that there's a lot of competition, because through this process, I have had the opportunity to interact with a lot of students from a lot of colleges in India. And I realized that, you know, in CMC, we are kind of in a very safe space. So when we step out of that, we really need to kind of find our ground, find our footing, and so to establish ourselves as graduates of such an esteemed institution, it is important that we stand out. And I'm sure we already do that, but of course, having a network of people who can support you through all phases of your career is very, very important. Another thing that really helped me was harnessing the power of social media. There's a lot of use of Twitter, LinkedIn, especially Twitter. I know Vimal sir is on Twitter, and it's like there's an academic side to Twitter, not the bad, the political side, but the academic side, where people share tweets which are like really easy to read and understand of their papers, scientific papers. So if you are somebody who's interested in research, but it's kind of boring for you to sit and read through the paper, entire article, then Twitter is something that you can join. You can just scroll through the feed and kind of follow researchers whose work you're interested in, and whenever papers are published, they automatically update. For example, if you're following any organization like ARCOT or IOTA, if any researcher from that organization or from that university or from that research group publishes a paper, because Twitter allows only 160 characters, they will either use it, post it as a thread, or they will publish it, they will post it as a single post with a link to the article, summarizing what the article is about. So it is a snippet, and it really gives you a lot of up-to-date, fast information, which is something that our generation is really used to. Then there's also LinkedIn. LinkedIn is also a great place to connect with people, reach out, ask for advice. Another thing is, I would really, really like to emphasize to the CMC graduates, please reach out to our alumni network. Vimal sir has definitely been one person who has been really helpful in my journey. And then there are also a lot of other people who've helped me individually and who've really spent time with me and fostered and mentored me. And that is one of the reasons why I want to give back through mentorship to the other community, to the larger community, because that has really helped me a lot. The help that I received from Joel, from Vineet sir, and from different people was really, really changed my life a lot. Another thing that I would say is grab every opportunity. There's only so many things that you can do at once, but I would definitely encourage you to go for those things because you're young now and you really have the time to do this. Because once you get into a professional job or like you start off with your career on a serious note, it might be a difficult thing. There might be a lot of things that you might have on your plate to juggle. So this is really a great time to start with grabbing opportunities. And stepping out of your comfort zone to explore is something that I really helped me as an individual. So not just being comfortable what you're learning in class or in clinics or in books. I found a specific area that I was very interested in. I was lucky in that sense, and I kind of dived deeper into it. So if there's something that you are also interested in, feel free to explore that further because there is so much of resources and opportunities that are available. And finally, think about how you can connect your profession, especially OT, because there's so much of research that is needed in the field with other domains. So I have connected OT with, continue to try to connect OT with public health and neuroscience. There are so many things that you can connect OT with, whether it is, like anything under the sun. So OTs do have a very important role to play in the field of rehabilitation, but not just in the field of rehabilitation. There's also so many things that OTs can do outside the field of rehabilitation. So think about how you can connect your profession to different domains. And I think these points hopefully can help you take that step forward. So thank you so much for listening. I hope I haven't exceeded the time a lot, but yeah, I can take any questions that I need.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stuti. That was very informative and sort of gives us an overview of all the research activity that you've been doing and taking us through some of the wicked problems that need to be solved in caring for some of our patients, especially those with neurological insults. You can stop sharing your screen so I can have a look at, oh, brilliant, thank you. I'll leave the forum open for questions. If you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I have a couple of questions that I'm hoping Stuti can answer and certainly might be useful for the participants in this call. but I'll wait to take questions from you first. Any questions? Okay, a very silent crowd. While people are digesting and thinking about questions, Joshua's camera's come on. Joshua, did you have a question?
It's not a question as such. First of all, I mean, if I would like to talk, I should start appreciating what Stuti has done. You've done an excellent job, Stuti, and finding Vimal, finding out all our alumni and doing your excellent research is really good. And I should also appreciate CMC for maintaining its standards in hiring such studious and positive people, right from 1980s to 2000 and so on. It's really cool. I also wanted to tell you about research in Australia. Australia is also a high-income country, which is now really looking forward for people to come here and do research, either as doctorate or postdocs. You know, it's all free here to do your PhD here, and they give you more money than earning as an OT to do your jobs, to do your research. So that's something you might want to consider. I'm hiring OTs, so not in terms of academics, but also in terms of clinicals. So you might want to think about all this stuff. The question I had in regards to these things, like in terms of research as an OT and bringing OT into public health, and what are the hurdles you were having in regards to establishing or making people understand that there is something called OT as a profession is there, and we can also do wonders to public health. Would you be able to give me some idea about that? How did you overcome these hurdles?
Yeah, for sure. So from my experiences, I kind of thought of working backwards from the wider perspective as a healthcare professional, as a clinician. I trained as a clinician and trained as an OT. So from the disability perspective is something that is really important for OTs to talk about or to be involved with, is what I felt. This is my personal experience. In general, in public health research, it's quite dominated by dentists, people from the pure medicine backgrounds, or people from other backgrounds, basic life science backgrounds. So as an OT, I think what we really bring in our niche or unique perspectives are in the field of disability, and also not just disability, but understanding how different disorders or diseases affect people in general, so the global burden of these diseases or disorders. Because we do have so much of clinical exposure, especially working in CMC, we do have quite a lot of clinical exposure. So we get to understand the perspectives of people. So it's not just quantitative research in terms of numbers, but also qualitative research to understand perspectives, share people's experiences, and how that can help in public health and policy forming. So I don't know if that adequately answers the question, but Vimal, if you would like to add anything, because you are doing public health research and you're the expert in that. So
I always have something to add to most questions, I find. It's a good question from Joshua, and you've answered most of it. It's just, as OTs and as, again, allied health professionals as a whole, if you look at public health, what we're trying to address is health inequalities. So how do you make sure that health is applicable to all in an equitable way? And public health, you think about things like environment, healthcare, education. Those are domains that OTs have a role to play in anyway. So we act as school OTs and children's OTs. We look at the environment and look at sustainability and how to make that better for people, be it modifications or adaptations or providing a wheelchair. We also intervene when health inequalities happen. So if someone's got a stroke or some neurological insult, so we intervene there as well. So from a clinical perspective, certainly we've got the skills and the knowledge set to help do that, and we're doing that on a daily basis. It's just that focusing it slightly differently so that we don't see people as patients, people as people, or people as citizens, then applying our knowledge and skills to help them. That's where public health and OT interface happens, I think. And a lot of us are working and doing lots of things. I know one of our alumni has a physio background. Kamraj is doing a lot of excellent work in Nepal in public health sphere, and he's doing stuff for COVID. And I was recently reading about how he's part of the WHO program to try and help people with COVID, etc. So it's just that we tend to be slightly afraid and join that public health conversation, and we do stuff anyway. It's just highlighting that and being actively involved. I think that's the difference that we have to make. Any other questions? Abraham? Just by way of introduction, I should say, Abraham is also an alumni, a physio alumni from CMC. He's associate professor at Mahi, and someone that from a research perspective and from a person perspective as well, is someone that I greatly, greatly admire. Abraham.
Thank you, sir. Wow. Stuti, a very inspiring talk. It was just wonderful to listen to you. You've done a lot, and I'm sure, it's just the beginning. There's much more to go. This whole thing of starting up something new, the initiative that you co-founded, what brought that on, and how do you go about doing? I know there isn't much of a difference between you and I in terms of years. We may be a few years apart, but it seems to me in my mind that that's a big roadblock. How do you think of things like that? How do you, you give me research, I can think of any number of things, but to think of something at this level, like starting up something as an organization, so what are the steps that go through, or you need to go through to get something labs together?
Well, thank you, sir, for that question. I think one thing was like the experiences that I had. So when like I said, when I was in high school, I didn't really have people to tell me about science in general, as not just as a subject, but beyond a subject, and really going into the depths of it and understanding it from different perspectives, interdisciplinary perspectives. So when I came to college, I had a lot of exposure. I was able to interact with different people. And so I realized that even then there was a need for people to really understand what they were studying in their curriculum. And that's why when I reached out to people from different colleges, or when I spoke to people from different colleges, I realized that there isn't like a lot of awareness, or there isn't a lot of help to young students, especially students who are currently in their 11th grade or 12th grade, to tell them about what research is, or what are the different things that you can do in pursuing a degree outside of MBBS or engineering or things like that. So even though the narratives are changing a lot nowadays, there is still a lot of stigma associated with that, what used to happen 10, 20 years back. So in terms of starting an initiative, there are a lot of administrative processes that are linked to it. So you have to register as an organization or as a nonprofit. So which is something that we are looking at right now, which has been a little challenging given that one of us has moved already to the US. And so I was really lucky to come across equally passionate people who really felt that there was a need to make a difference. So I think that is the main thing. More than anything else, a lot of people want to do a lot of things, but very few people really feel the need to make a difference in the community or to help people. And that is something that does not just add to their CV, but they want to genuinely make a difference and help other students. So I was very blessed, and I actually came across, again, through my network, I participated in the Brain Awareness Week, which was organized by IIT Gandhinagar in 2020. And I came across Shreya, who's one of my co-founders with me at Stimulus right now. And one of the things that she did that was amazing was that, so generally when there's a concert, there's a festival, or there's a quiz that happens, most of the medical colleges, or in my experience that I've seen, they open an Instagram page or a social media page, and they keep it active and alive only till the fest is going on. And once the fest is on, just to get engagement, viewership, registrations, even for conferences, this happens. And once the page goes, once the conference is over, the page goes inactive. But what the great thing that she did was that she she kept the page alive on Instagram, and she kept posting opportunities about different things that were happening in the field, like maybe a conference where you could submit your abstract, or maybe a competition that was happening, or a research internship, or some professor who was hosting students, or a talk or a webinar. And she kept that active even after the Brain Awareness Week was over. And I saw that this person really wanted to genuinely make a difference, because she was not ultimately gaining anything out of it. Her Brain Awareness Week contest was over. She had got the grant. She had finished her work. She could just go home and finish it off. But she didn't do that. She kept it active. And that's why I really connected with her. And when I reached out to her, I saw that she was genuinely interested in helping people and giving back to people and mentoring people. So she also obviously comes from a psychology background. So she does relate with OTs, and she knows about things that OTs do. And because she has been working in the field of neurodevelopmental studies, she knows about the importance of OTs in that field. So we connected. And the major thing that we realized was that a lot of people don't have awareness about different things, like especially at a younger level or young students. So they want to know more things, they want to be more active, they want to be more involved, but they don't know how to go about with it, they don't know how to start. So that's why we felt the need to do this. And our area is quite niche, it's quite specific. There are a lot of medical students organizations or alumni, associations for engineers or different professions that are professional, and they are quite at the corporate level. They have a hierarchical structure and things like that. But we wanted Stimulus to just be completely led by volunteers and youth-led initiatives, so that we don't involve any hierarchy in this. And I think the main thing is just to kind of get together like-minded people and go beyond having just a conversation and actually take action in terms of what you would like to have your vision translated.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I mean, it's a lot of wisdom coming from someone like you. So it's a learning experience, and I think it's taking that extra step and doing things, engaging on social media. I mean, these are things that I think many of us still try to get a grasp around, but it's not as difficult as one makes it out to think. And just to reiterate two things which you said, I think networking is key for those of you who are a group. I mean, I know I benefit a lot from my networks, and it's my networks that have helped me grow as well. And therefore, networking is extremely important, and it's a skill that we need to learn. It's not just reaching out to someone and saying, I want to write something with you, but you need to build a rapport. I think my networks are all friends of mine now. So even if we don't write, we are still friends. And at some point, suddenly an opportunity comes, and suddenly a group of us come together. So, but we are friends first, and we write afterwards. So I think that's something that definitely should be taken up. And integrating public health into allied health is the way to go. We need to scale up a lot of our interventions and move from just a clinic-centric thing to actually reaching people who need it. So excellent.
Thank you, both of you. I understand from Rima that there are people from outside of CMC on this call as well. So I'm going to give an opportunity for someone from not the CMC crowd to ask a question. And I'm at great pains to let people know that there are no stupid questions. There are no questions that you can get wrong. This is your opportunity to ask people who are much like you, have gone through that journey, who've excelled at things that we've done, etc. So don't feel shy, don't feel hesitant. If you are from outside of CMC, want to ask a question, clarify a doubt, and use this as an opportunity to start networking as well. Put yourself out there, ask a question, ask if you can connect later with Stuti or one of the other alumni from CMC. This is your opportunity to do so. So if there's someone from, I obviously don't recognize very many names, from outside of CMC, if you're on the call, if you want to ask a question or just introduce yourself, it doesn't even have to be a question. just introduce yourself, express an opinion, and now's your chance to do so. And everybody on the call is from CMC.
No, so there are people from outside here.
Okay. I'll be guided by you. But don't hesitate. I know the anxiety. I've been through that phase in my life when you think, if I ask a question, I'll sound or seem stupid. And so I'll rather keep quiet. And I think most of us have been through that. I have a PhD, but I still have imposter syndrome when I talk to some people because I don't know, I always think that I know much less than they do, even if it's about a topic that I'm comfortable talking about. And that happens however an expert you are. I've seen my professors, my supervisors have the same hesitancy sometimes, but that's something that you need to overcome. And this is a good opportunity. To me, this is a safe space. You can ask questions. You're not going to be judged on your clinical knowledge or skills. So if you have questions, it doesn't have to be a question, like I say, it could be an opinion. I keep an eye on participant numbers, and that usually gives me a clue when people start disappearing, because people are going to pick on me, I'll rather disappear. And we seem to have lost about 8 people since I started asking for questions. Maybe I should stop. No questions. I'm also conscious of time, and I'm keeping an eye on time as well. I think if there are no other questions from people outside of CMC, do anyone else who are from CMC or have a question for Stuti? Okay, from something from the chat. So Nirupa, awesome, very inspiring presentation. I'm interested to know your thoughts on the role of OT neuroscience related to autism. Do you want to take that question, Stuti? That's from Nirupa.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So, of course, neuroscience is very important, and we have one of our alumni working on neuroscience and autism and combining both. Her name is Joelle. She's from the batch of 2006, and she is currently in the US, and a lot of her research focuses on understanding brain activity and patterns of brain activity in children with autism, and translating that into improve, optimize, and provide optimized therapeutic intervention for children with autism. So she trained as an OT, and then she went into academic research. Maybe she can provide you some insight more into this, but from what I have read and from what I have understood, there is a huge overlap. One being, so there are, I think, the major domains of neuroscience research that are relevant to OTs, and there's a lot of funding for autism research. So I think autism, dementia, ADHD, these are quite funded, large, very, very, very heavily funded diseases right now, just like cancer. So autism research is very heavily funded. So there's a lot of opportunity, and the major things that OTs can contribute to or have been working towards are understanding brain waves through EEG, electroencephalic activity, brain waves that are affected in children with autism. So there's something as known as the P300, which is the positive 300 wave that comes when you take an EEG, when you place an EEG cap or an EEG electrode on the head of children with autism, and then you present a stimulus on the computer, like a beeping sound or something. There's something known as the oddball paradigm, which are again very classical experiments which psychologists have been doing, but a lot of OTs are also doing this type of research to understand how the responses are delayed in children with autism, and when therapeutic intervention is given with the help of, let's say, sensory stimulation or sensory or visual stimuli, auditory stimuli, how the brain waves change or the brain patterns change in response to these different types of stimuli, and whether their senses are elevated or they're heightened, or there is a lag in terms of how the brain processes this information, and what that tells us about how an autistic child behaves and how that ultimately translates into behavior. So that is one thing. There's also something that is very interesting that I came across recently, and that is something that one of the professors at the labs that I was interested in was doing is in slightly older children with ADHD, autism, language processing, and the gut microbiota. So this is something, I don't know if OTs are interested in this, but this is basically looking at, so this is a little bit of basic science research, but we already train children on feeding, and we know that children with autism have sensory issues related to feeding, or they have issues related to being picky eaters. And so examining gut microbiota from fecal stool samples or fecal samples in the research lab, and how that relates to structural and functional brain scans of children with autism, and how that can be influenced or improved with the help of OT intervention. So there's like a 3-phase thing. So first is examining stool samples and understanding how children eat, like patterns of feeding, why there are specific sensory aversive behaviors. And second thing would be to understanding how their brain activity works through functional neuroimaging and scans of their brain. And then the third thing is how that translates into behavior or their performance, or how that affects their play and their participation. So I don't know if that answers the question, but there's a lot of research and a lot of scope for OTs and to combine neuroscience research. And now recently I read about basic science research of the gut microbiota and how that translates into OT practice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Stuti. You always seem to have an answer for everything that people throw at you. It's a good skill to have, I think. I'm going to bring this to a conclusion. I'm going to hand it back to Rima with a quick note to thank Rima as well for spending time, inviting people, organizing this, and doing lots of the background work. A talk like this, even if it seems like a 1-hour talk, requires lots of coordination, planning, and execution, and some of the pain that goes with it. I think Rima has dealt with trying to organize this for a number of sessions now. I think it's the 14th one, did you mention, Rima? So I want to thank Stuti for your wonderful talks at the end. All the best. I'm hoping we remain in touch through your next career and journey. And like Abby said, it'll be something that I'll watch with wonder and awe as you lead a shining light to what OTs could achieve. And I want to also thank Rima for helping organize this, obviously, and for inviting me to come along. So huge thanks, Rima. I know the trouble and the pain that sits behind organizing these things. And also to give a shout out to Rima. I think the topic is very pertinent as well. Rima is a very keen researcher, and someone has published loads of papers in mental health, and Rima's articles are one thing that I read with lots of enthusiasm because it has lots of interface with some of my research aspirations and ideas, and she's a very good academic writer, if I can say that. It's very good to read your writing, Rima. I'll hand over to you to conclude, and thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would like to start by thanking Stuti for that talk, for taking the time and the effort to be out there. And Stuti, on a personal note, I have always been proud of the stuff that you've done. I am proud to say that you're my junior. You know, in OPTAA we have this foster junior thing, and she's from my life. So she's my junior, and I know there's miles and miles for you to go, and I look forward to, with pride, to look forward to what you're going to accomplish from there. Okay, Joshua, you can stop. Thank you, Vimal sir, for always being there for us, especially in the last 2-3 years after I've taken on as president. You have agreed to be part of the education care group, the core group, and you're also part of the advisory board, and you've never said no to anything that I've asked, and I want to thank you for that. So today morning, I just asked Vimal sir, what does OPTAA mean to you? So he said, OPTAA is a collection of alumni that comes together to collaborate, learn, and support each other. And one of the things that I'm happy is that we are also trying to collaborate with people outside of CMC, because as Stuti was saying, it's high time we started networking. We started looking outside also. There are a lot of things that we can give to students and faculty working within India but outside of CMC, and there's a lot that we can also learn from them. So I'm happy that we have started this initiative of inviting other people also to attend our webinars, and I hope that this continues. Now, one word that Vimal sir used that I didn't really expect was, he said, to celebrate the OT and PT profession and professionals. And when I read it for the first time, I was like, wow, celebration. Over the last 2 years, celebration is really not a word that I associate with stuff. It's more of a responsibility. But as I was listening to Abhi's comments, your comments, Joshua's comments, the questions that were asked, I realized that there's a lot of passion. There's a lot of passion within us. Especially as Stuti was talking about why she started Stimulus. One thing that she said that really struck me was to do things which are not going to be really great on your CV, but just for the sake of doing it. And I think that really resonated with me. I think as we grow older and we get more and more responsibilities, we kind of forget about the things that we were passionate about it when we were younger. And there's a sense of stagnation, or I won't be able to do it. I'm too old to do stuff like that. I'm dealing with it, so I don't know whether others deal with it. But now I realize, I think I have my take on why Vimal sir used the word celebration. So meeting like this, talking about our work, talking about things that ultimately we are all passionate about our profession, I think that's great. So thank you all for joining in. We usually have our webinars on the third Saturday of every month. The next webinar is slotted for April, the third Saturday of April. And we have Ms. Hima, who will be talking to us. It is a topic. Hima is an alumnus from the batch of 2004. She has more than 15 years of experience in the NICU in CMC. So she will be talking to us about early identification of disabilities in children. So I'm really looking forward to this topic also, and I invite everybody who is joining in from the other colleges to keep in touch and let us know your comments and your suggestions also for the future webinars. So thank you all for joining in, and have a nice weekend, everyone.